Welcome to Out on a Limb podcast with your hosts, Will and Allison, and a special in-person guest today, Mr. Chris Cunniffe. And we are super excited to welcome Chris here because he's a local Charleston person and we run in the same circles, but we don't really interact a lot. So this will be actually the longest conversation that we've had with you, Chris. Yeah. But by way of background, Chris was raised in New York, in Long Island, on Long Island, I guess they say. And is actually a 1996 graduate of Harvard Law School. So this is going to be fun because he was super left brain, right. And now we're going to talk metaphysics.
Right.
But he practiced law for 8 years, and then he launched his own real estate brokerage company in 2004, and then continues to be active as a real estate entrepreneur. He arrived in Charleston roughly around 1998, but in 2015, he founded Lucid Coaching LLC to offer services that are in alignment with his passion for the study of dreams, the law of attraction, and other metaphysical interests, and that's where it's going to get juicy.
Right, yep.
Chris is very active in the Charleston metro area. He serves as a board member for 2 Charleston area nonprofits, Bliss Spiritual Co-op, which you guys have heard us talk about a lot, and the Charleston Young Society. So, welcome, Chris.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
excited. Absolutely.
So, we always ask our interviewees certain foundational types of questions because we're curious about your background. Obviously, you went into very conventional, conservative types of professions early on, very much left brain, highly intelligent. So were you raised with any kind of metaphysical understanding or religion per se, or how were you raised?
Yeah, it's a good foundation to start with. So I came from a pretty traditional background. My family was Irish Catholic. And so I was in a suburban environment as a kid in Long Island. I attended a Catholic grade school. I had nuns as teachers, then we had a principal who was a nun. And then I went to an all boys Catholic high school. And so that had
indoctrination.
That had a pretty heavy vibration to it. It was interesting. My wife and I, by some synchronicity, we happened to be in Long Island for other things when they had the 25-year reunion going back quite a few years. And it was interesting to go back there, and you can actually still feel that sort of heavy vibe there when you're there. And it was, and maybe I sort of understood why I didn't really fit in. And then I actually went on to go to a Catholic college on top of that. So I really had it sort of drilled into me.
Wowza,
and that was sort of the foundation of my youth. But, I want to talk a little bit too, of just going back to early belief systems and how they affect you. Another foundational event for me when I was young was that my dad passed away when I was 13 years old. And he had had a long healthcare struggle with Hodgkin's disease. And when he passed, there were some events that happened at that time that probably were ultimately more influential in my spiritual path than sort of the whole Catholic upbringing was.
Okay.
And one of those things was that someone had given my mother a book by the medium George Anderson. George is pretty well known in mediumship circles. Maybe not as famous today as he was maybe in the 80s and 90s. But I read a book that was written about him called We Don't Die. And it was basically radio transcript. Back then it was radio shows instead of podcasts, right?
Yeah.
It was radio transcripts when they would have him on air and he would do readings for people live on the air. Wow. And it was something that really blew me away and at the time gave me a lot of comfort. And that was an important seed that I always had with me really all my life, because as we'll talk about, I did then go pretty deep left brain with studying law and practicing law and getting into the business world, real estate stuff. And so for a fairly long period of time, I'd say, in my 20s and into my early, mid, late 30s, I was a materialist thinker for the most part. But that seed I had early on was there. And it did lead me occasionally in bookstores to pick up books that were metaphysically oriented because I already had like a little bit of an opening for that.
Yeah.
So for instance, I know I read probably around when I was 30, I read books by Michael Newton, the hypnotherapist, with past lives, life between lives and things like that. And so those were influential. And I'd say painting the picture a little bit more, if I go back to when I was in college, an important part of my journey was actually breaking free of sort of the Catholic indoctrination. And an important source for that was the author Thomas Paine. Now, we associate Thomas Paine mostly with, he was a pamphleteer in the Revolutionary War, and he wrote articles about freedom and the importance of independence and things like that. But he also, while he was jailed in France during the French Revolution, he wrote a big treatise called The Age of Reason. And he was sitting in the jail cell with a copy of the Bible. And he basically spent quite a bit of time tearing apart the Bible and showing you how some of the absurdities that are in the Bible and how violent a book it is at times.
Wow.
And it really helped me. He was an important person to break me, going to the left brain, going into reason more was a way to break free of some of the indoctrination.
Kind of a middle ground before you could.
Yeah, I feel like I had to first break up that indoctrination. And then I could later rely upon that seed I had from, say, the George Anderson book and other books I started to pick up over the years. And over time, I did sort of develop this metaphysical interest, which then sort of peaked for me around 2008 or so, where I just started to get more and more curious. I began to have more of a voracious appetite for reading books and would ask friends for recommendations. And that's when I got introduced to some channeling sources. I remember a friend of mine asked me, he said, I don't know if you're open to channeling. And I was like, channeling?
Right.
I mean, I was not.
You mean that Shirley MacLaine stuff?
Right.
He said, well, there's this book, Abraham Hicks, you should, he was into that.
yes.
Yeah. So I was like, channeling, so I really was not really open to it, but I did trust my friend because we had a lot of conversations over the years. And I did start watching some of the YouTube videos. And sooner or later, I found myself pretty well swept up with that body of work. The Abraham work led me to the Seth books by Jane Roberts.
Yep.
And so those are sort of two foundational teachers for me, the Abraham material and the Seth material. The Seth material goes into greater depth with dream work and other, you might say, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, those alternative states of consciousness. That's something that Seth really goes into greater depth in teaching. And so getting into that, getting exposed to those books was what inspired me probably around 2011 to say, you know what, I need to be journaling my dreams. I need to be having some direct experiences. And then also that was like a headlong dive.
Yeah.
I dove into that dream work, initially just remembering one or two dreams a night, then learning about lucid dreaming, starting to have some experiences with lucidity in my dreams, getting to the point where at the peak of my experience with that, because I'm not there right now, I could remember 12, 13, 14 dreams in a night because I was really exercising that muscle.
Right.
And have dips of experience in lucid dreaming. But that required me getting up, waking up at the end of every REM sleep cycle. So waking up 3 or 4 times during the night, recording 2 or 3 dreams each time. So when you wake up in the morning, you really haven't necessarily gotten the best night's sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
But you've recorded a lot of fantastic dreams. And really, there's no limit to how much dream material you can pull into waking life other than the limit of your time. Because at some point, you just start to have too many notes.
Yeah.
And I like to, move them over to my computer so I could word search them later and things like that. So at some point, you got to strike a balance. But it was good to go through a period of really diving into it because it really showed me how much potential there is, how deep the well is. It's an extremely deep well of creativity and wisdom. And so I really encourage people, as part of my mission is to encourage people to do some dream work, to realize that they have this really deep well that they can tap into and learn from. So
Cool.
Fantastic. And we're going to get into all of that.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention something funny, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but I read Seth Speaks, which is a good one if you
Yes.
haven't read that.
Fantastic.
And Seth at some point in that book said something about that humans work really well on 4-hour sleep schedules. So you should sleep 4
yes.
hours and wake 4. So I'm like, this sounds really good.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, when you read Seth Speaks, it's so gung-ho, you get into
Yeah,
it. It's just
right.
amazing truth. You understand it as truth. So I was like, hey, I'm going to do
Yeah.
this 4-hour sleep thing. He's like, can you rethink that? That's
Yeah,
not really functional.
Really, at the point at which that would have been around 2015, 16. That was your fundamental learning too, was
Yeah.
Seth and
Abraham, of course.
and all that. And in that time frame, I was retiring from the military. I was getting my feet under me in the civilian sector, getting my degree work done and all that stuff. I'm like, Yeah, 4-hour cycles is not going to work for me
Right, yeah.
at this moment. Maybe now, but yeah, not then.
It's just not practical
No.
for most people.
Yeah, yeah.
But I want to get back to the Catholic upbringing. You know, what I wrote about in The Journey Within is my kind of breaking free from the traditional conservative Christian background. And it wasn't Catholicism, but I wonder, because I went through some anger. Once I realized that our potential was being withheld, hidden from us, and even more so in the Catholic Church, if you dive into the Vatican stuff and all of that sort of thing, and you can really go off a cliff with that. So I wonder, did you go through any of that during your transition, any anger about what had been hidden from you, or the lies perhaps that you experienced, or anything like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that anger was a big part of my journey. I think it was just really a process of maybe not realizing that I was previously bound, that one of the things with Catholicism in particular is there's a guilt for questioning.
Yes.
And so that's something that takes a little time and energy to get over. And I know a lot of people who are still, under that influence of that feeling of guilt, that they should not question things, no matter how irrational it may sound to them. So it was a feeling for me, not really of a journey of anger, but more of a journey of gradually feeling freer and freer and freer to question things, and then just finally breaking free and realize, and it was an important part of because then I had a clean slate to work with, and then I could say, okay. Seth is important too in when he talks about the ego. We tend to sometimes criticize the ego in some spiritual circles, but the Seth work taught me that the ego is something to be transformed. It's not something to be abolished.
Right.
And that for me, the process with the ego is now, okay, let's now feed the ego with new information about how the universe might actually work. With new information about metaphysical wisdom, about past lives, about the law of attraction, about how things really, really work. And then your ego can start to thrive in a new way. Yep. Because even if your ego is motivated to, say, make money, which is a natural thing for people to want to do. Sure. You can transform it. So now it's like, okay, do I make money the old-fashioned way where I have to bang my head against the wall, repeatedly work hours and grind it out during the day? And we still have that in our business culture. There's the grind, and a lot of people who teach the grind. And there's some usefulness to that at some point in your career. But what I'm trying to do with my business coaching work that I do as part of the spiritual coaching is to say, what about the idea that you can simply generate more synchronicity in your life? In other words, what if you were just in the right place at the right time more often? Yeah. And you didn't have to grind it out, and that opportunity simply presented themselves to you, and you simply had to act on them as just like taking the next natural step. And you don't necessarily need to be in a state of stress and anxiety to thrive economically. So that's another part of what I'm trying to teach, is just a new way, a new paradigm for being more conscious about how we create things and realizing we don't have to rely upon the old methods.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the ego, because, well, first of all, you have a good perspective because Carl Jung talked about that a lot. But in the metaphysical arena, we want to say ego death. You need to kill the ego. It has to die, all of that. But we can't exist as a human without the ego, because that's what gives us the individuation. That's kind of the vehicle through which we function as a human being. And so it is, like you said, about reshaping it and feeding it new information and
building a deeper relationship with it versus casting it aside and saying it's all bad. I have to do, because if in my perspective, if you completely dissolve the ego, well, then there's no need to be here doing what we're doing in our humanness, right? We've ascended at that point. We've shedded the shell and we're off journeying somewhere else. And so we came here to enjoy every moment of this. So it is to strike balance, and all of that is, of our
Right. And the other concept you brought up, which was fantastic, is a lot of our viewers are seekers, not all, but many of them are seekers.
Some are finders too.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're going to be. They found this podcast.
That's right.
But they're looking at Abraham Hicks and those types of things are getting their feet wet with a lot of these concepts. And Abraham Hicks talks about what you just said, which is ease and flow rather than pushing against and resisting. So doing the grind and exerting yourself, putting forth effort is a lot more tiring, and it's a lot less productive really in the long run than allowing it to flow, getting into the flow of that river kind of metaphor.
Right.
So very good. I'm glad you brought that up. Were there any, then you seem to have gotten out of this Christian Catholic construct unscathed. Were there any, unlike a lot of Catholics?
Let me add something too. There's still something valuable in other words, when you free yourself from it, you can still then go back to it and cherry pick the stuff that was really valuable in it. I don't want to dismiss it completely.
You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. So I was talking to my wife the other night about when I was in the 6th grade, I had Sister Mary Eleanor was my teacher.
You still remember her name.
And she was a devotee of the Virgin Mary. And a metaphysical person would not say Virgin Mary because we would think that that's not actually the case. And I don't necessarily believe she was a virgin, but she was a devotee of Mary, right? And she would say, she managed to recite it over and over again, "Oh, most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your intercession would be left unaided." And the strength of her faith, as I look back on that now, it's very emotional for me. It's like, wow, so there's power in that. In other words, there's power in faith. There's power in belief. And metaphysical person might say, well, she was misguided to have her faith in Mary. What I would say,
not necessarily.
Not necessarily at all. She chose her goddess, and her goddess was Mary.
Right.
And she was tapping into a feminine energy source.
Yes.
And a very, very powerful one.
Absolutely.
That millions of people around the world are devoted to. And so, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because I do sometimes look back. In my office, I still have some statues of some things from Catholic tradition that still are relevant for me. But it's all about a blending now. In other words, you become more mature enough now where you can look back on that period of life and you can pick the very best parts of it and now integrate them into a new perspective.
Right, but we work with a lot of recovering Catholics.
Sure.
And there was a lot of anger with many of them. And so they throw away Jesus particularly, and they don't want anything to do with Jesus. And if they start channeling and Jesus comes through, they're like, what the hell are you doing here, right? I don't want to talk to you. I'm angry at you. And so a lot of them, and I was one of them, we come back around to understanding. And I feel comforted by some of the religious songs that we used to sing, or, the words that still bring me to tears, or the song Hallelujah is one of my favorite, even though it's not a religious hymn per se. Right.
I mean, many of you have heard my path through this, and I wasn't raised in any of that framework until my early 30s when, we went to the Methodist Church. Well, understanding what the Holy Spirit felt like at that point, being an adult, having that energy, sitting in the pew, sitting in the sermon and listening to that and having that energy flush through me. And I couldn't quite explain what it was, but I was just overtaken by it, the Holy Spirit. Well, then as we stepped away from the church and now the whole metaphysical realm starts to take over, that energy is no different. It's the same feeling for me. Same energy. So it's just a wrapper that we put around things. And it is that, construct, I will say, that humanity has, I'd hate to use the word, but manipulated over a period of time, right? So, and it's just, it takes that form. And I wouldn't say that it's just in Catholicism or whatever. It's in every religion. There is some human twist to it.
Yeah.
Anytime humans put their hands in something.
But at the core, it's all the same source. It's all the same, same energy coming in.
And I'm glad you brought up Mother Mary. We tend to call her Mother Mary. And I would guarantee you that almost every single session when they want to know who their guides are, Mother Mary is one of them. And mostly she's there to bring forth that loving, heart-centered compassion energy, that female, that divine feminine, but not the warrior feminine. It's more of that loving mother, heart-centered energy, which is very healing for people who have been through trauma and so forth.
Right.
But as I was going to mention, since you you seem to be very have a lot of equanimity in terms of
That's the lawyer in me.
how you were able to bridge that, which is good.
Right.
But I wonder, did you ever have a dark night of the soul on this journey at all? Were there any times when you just felt in a pit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's all unicorns for me. I mean, certainly the periods of like the period when my dad passed when I was 13 was I don't know what I would call it, a dark night of the soul, but it was a challenging period of life, and it reoriented me to just, I think looking back at it now, it helped me face the deeper questions of life at an earlier age than maybe most people do, and maybe that played a role in how my interests evolved over time. But the rest of my experience, for the most part, has more or less been sort of a gradualist experience. It hasn't been one where I had, deep trauma of any sort. That I hear. I know many people's spiritual path is a trauma-based awakening,
For sure.
and that's just maybe the path for some people. But really, for me, that's not really been my path.
Yeah, for us either. And
Right.
you lamented that fact for a while.
Yeah, I was on
He
the
felt like
opposite.
he-
I was on the opposite side. I was like,
didn't earn
okay,
the-
I need that in order to earn my stripes,
Right.
But now I've come to the realization, well, this is the contract that I drew up for this lifetime to just
Yes.
kind of ease through this
That's right.
comfortably. And I think there is some, the way I would look at it at least for my journey is if I had those moments where I've been through the dark night and I've taken on all this trauma and I've done all this stuff, well, that's an additional layer of filtering that sets into place for when I go into my channeling work, where if I kind of it naturally just evenly flows through, the filter matrix that's there is a bit more open, and nothing gets trapped in there. It just kind of, I can enter into my space a lot easier without having to go through all the other layers.
So I'm curious, Chris, I know you're married.
Yes.
Were you already investigating this sort of thing when you met your wife? And how did she feel about all
Yeah,
this?
it's sort of somewhat funny. So yes, when I met my wife, when I started dating my wife, I was in sort of the early stages of what I'm doing, and I was dipping my toe into Abraham. And so the first time I went to see the Abraham, because I've been to see Abraham live, I don't know,
Have you?
7 or 8 times. I've been in the hot seat.
My God.
I've been in
Really?
the hot seat many times. So
On one of the cruises or?
once on a cruise and a bunch of times when they were in Asheville. So yeah, on YouTube, I'm sometimes the guy in the hot seat asking the
really? I
question.
gotta listen.
Yeah. So
Listen for Chris's voice.
Often about dreams. But yeah, the first time I went by myself, and I think at that time my wife was probably like, "No, you can go to that. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this channeling thing." Just like, because it was a pretty dramatic turn to suddenly be interested in that stuff. But yeah, she started hearing me talk about it more, and I'll let her speak for herself sometime. But yeah, she started coming with me more and more to those events, and I probably have stronger interest, more intense interest in some of these topics than she does. But it's something we can share together, and we do talk about together privately.
Good.
So we are able to have that element in our relationship, which we're very compatible on. So yeah.
That's really good. So did you meet her here in Charleston?
Yes, she's a Charlestonian. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Good. But because we talk about this as well, is a lot of times, whether it's within the church or outside of the church, the woman is usually the one that starts to investigate and look into all these things
Right.
and drag their husband kicking and screaming like I did with you into the Methodist church.
Yeah,
I'm like,
for sure.
dude, you need to come with me, or
Right.
there might be a problem here.
Right.
So, and because of that, sometimes if you're not growing together with this
Right.
similar interest,
There
then
can
you
be
can
a-
really create a rift. And in fact, just today I found out that a friend of ours who just started channeling a lot more. She just told me she's getting divorced.
Fully stepping into her true self, right? And instead of where before she was trying to really push a lot of what was welling up inside aside.
Well, I think it was being inhibited because of the relationship with her husband, who was not fully on board.
Right.
And so sadly, they're going to part ways.
No, I will say I'm an advocate of gradualism with this stuff. In other words,
Yeah.
you could go. I'm going to go to India, or I'm going to go to Tibet. I'm going to go live in a cave, and nothing wrong with that. If that's your path, and many people have done that, many people have had very transformative experiences doing that. But no, I'm not necessarily an advocate. I think it's more like, if you start to vibrate in a higher level where you are, then where you are will be transformed. And it's not necessary for you to go through such dramatic lengths to have a transformative experience.
Absolutely.
It's an integrative process where you are at that moment.
Right.
And it's recognizing that and honoring that. I think that's where I think some of the misplacement takes place is many of us, on this journey, we start feeling that, and we don't know what to do. So we're like, oh, we'll just do what everybody else does and we'll pack a bag and head off to an ashram or go wherever. And sometimes that's not the best solution because that isn't, quite in line with maybe what you're supposed to be doing.
And just about every single client, again, that we have, they'll always ask, well, what should I do about my spouse? How can I support my spouse, or how can I support my children? And it always comes back to self. Inevitably they'll say, work on yourself, and as your vibration rises and you start reverberating out, it changes everything. And like you said, it brings in the perfect experiences and people for your journey.
Right.
It helps. Everybody else is going to look at you and say, hey, what is he doing? He's really glowing. And I want some of that. Exactly.
Well, in Abraham speak, they famously say quite a bit. They say a lot. If you're in a bad relationship, we're not going to tell you need to stay in the bad relationship. You can leave. If you're in a bad job, we're not going to tell you have to stay in the bad job. But they like to say, but remember, you're going to take yourself with you.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you don't do the inner work, and so it often is better if you're in a job that you don't like to experiment for a while. What if I try to change myself in this job and see if the job transforms? And likewise, why don't I see if I can stay in this relationship? Now, I'm not advocating if it's an extremely abusive situation. No. But if it's not that level of abusiveness, then it might be fun. And this is something I try to just, even in smaller ways, the opportunities for transformation exist in just our daily routine. Yeah. So one thing I often talk about in my meetup group is when you're on the line at the security line at the airport, that's the time to do spiritual practice. Find those things that normally frustrate you and make you anger, and see that you're buying into a pattern of thought that's part of mass consciousness that you've just bought into. Instead, use that time. Look around. Look for kids that are doing funny things. Look for people that are wearing interesting clothing. Look for interesting interactions between the security officers and the people going through the airport. And I did this once. Actually, I was in the baggage claim section, and it was taking a while for my bag to come out. And I started to feel that frustration, welling up. And I said, no. I got to practice what I teach. Right. And I started to scan the environment. And lo and behold, as I did that, a woman, I don't know if she's a professional baton twirler or something like that, but in the baggage claim area, she basically starts putting on a performance. And I was amazed how quickly, when I shifted my intention and my vibration, that I attracted a reflection of that.
Yeah. Yes.
So yes.
That's
awesome. that's getting in touch with your power.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the more that you run from situations and don't do the inner work, you're not using your power. You're not using the transformative power of controlling and changing your vibration.
Exactly. Yes. Man, some words of wisdom already, and we're only 30 minutes in.
All right.
And if you have not already hit that thumbs up, hit that thumbs up.
And let me add one other thing on this topic too. And this goes back to Seth, and something I talk again a lot in my meetup groups. Some people will come to the meetup group saying, I want to do this, but I have this other obligation, or I'm excited about this, but I'm also. So Seth talks about creative stacking, and he says, your talents are never meant to be in opposition to each other. So in my own case, I am passionate about real estate. I've been interested in real estate for a long time. I've worn every hat there is to wear as a broker, as a real estate lawyer, as a developer, as a property manager. I get excited talking about real estate deals. I'm a deal maker. I like the excitement of the deal. I get my juices flowing with real estate. Okay, that's a talent, that's an interest, that's an excitement for me. And initially I thought, no, I'm going to do this dramatic turn. I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to be a dream coach and a life coach and law of attraction coach. And that's all I'm going to do. But shortly after I was making that pivot, I read some Seth again about the creative stacking. He says, no, you're supposed to layer these things on top of each other. So now some of my real estate agents that are in my company are very interested in law of attraction. I do coaching and mentoring, talking about law of attraction with my realtors that work in my shop. And so how fantastic is that? I'm able to take the environment I'm in and transform it.
Right.
I don't need to run away from the environment I'm
That's
in. Right. But it's just more exciting for me now when I feel challenges to say, okay, let me do the inner work and see if I can transform the situation rather than feeling I have to go run to do something else.
Fantastic. Because one of the number one things that what we've experienced is that people who start in this metaphysical realm, or they learn a modality and they want to start doing it and sharing it. Of course, you're excited.
Instantly quit
they want to quit their job.
Right.
And it's frustrating because seeing one-on-one clients in this kind of realm, you're not going to typically support yourself if you're a single household income.
Well, yeah, the client base or the well that you're in dries up pretty quickly. I mean, if you're in a geographic region, there's only so many that are going to be part of your client base. It's in trying to do scale in the metaphysical world.
Right. And
equating that to business tactics is a bit difficult. Yeah. So, yeah.
But secondly, people are needed in those areas, in those arenas. Like I work in education, and is it frustrating? Of course it is. It's my passion for 25 years. I'm nearing retirement and I'm getting tired, but I know that I'm there to hold the light in my building. Yeah. And, we need people in the finance industry, real estate industry. We need people in all of these realms holding that high vibration, reverberating out into, if we all quit those jobs and we just stay in our little house and see clients, then we're not also serving the greater humanity.
And over time, it may very well be that as you start the transformation, that what initially might be the side hustle or the hobby that's metaphysical, that may pick up steam, and you may find, I'm finding myself being drawn to do more and more things in that area. And so that's natural progression as well. But yeah, you don't have to force it. If it feels forced and unnatural, I would say don't do that. Do the creative stacking. Layer these talents upon each other. I
hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, and it gives you opportunities to really look for those universal signs that are being, I'll even say, thrown at you, because we miss a lot of them most of the time. And my for instance, in that was I was involved in the corporate tech startup world and loving what I was doing. I was absolutely loving what I was doing, and my team told me early on that we're going to give you a sign that it's time to step away. Well, when you're enjoying something, you're never really going to look for the sign. You're going to, you're just going to, your head's down and you're doing what you'd love to do. And there was one pivotal moment sitting in a business development meeting with our research partners, and it was like a light switch went on. Yeah. I mean, I saw the complete transformation of where everything was going, and I said, I literally sat back on my chair. I'm like, well, there's nothing more I can give to this, because this is my exit point. And 90 days later I was out. So, but yeah, so you have to just, it gives you opportunities to really grow and look for the nuances and understand what the universe is actually guiding you towards. It might be to stay there, but grow in a different way. Like you're saying, stack those resources, stack those abilities, and really interlace them really tight.
So I really like this lucid dreaming topic, and we have not talked about it on the podcast. It's very interesting, I think, to the audience as well. But I wonder, because you started with law of attraction and Abraham Hicks and so forth, is there an intersection between Abraham Hicks, or was it more of the Seth material with the lucid dreaming? Oh,
there's definitely an intersection. And I've actually, when I've been in the hot seat with Abraham, I've asked about lucid dreaming questions. Well, I mean, I'm trying to remember specifically what I asked them, but they would say that, I remember one time them saying something to the effect that that's really a wonderful state of consciousness. In other words, it's really blending that when you get into the lucid dream state, or most of us when we get into, let's just say non-lucid dreaming, we are generally in a state of allowing. In other words, we're in a sort of a passive, we just accept the role that we're in, but our energy tends to be vibrating, depending on the circumstance, a little higher than in waking life. But when you add the lucidity to it, you're bringing in this sort of element of consciousness, awareness, intention, and you're able to create in an environment that allows you to have greater freedom to create.
Now tell us, before we go too far, what does lucid dreaming mean? What is your definition? Yeah,
there are different definitions. I tend to look at lucidity, people sometimes look at lucidity as black and white. I tend to look at it as many shades of gray, as like a sliding scale. because for one thing, looking at that way is helpful for people on a path to see that they're making progress.
Right.
But let's start out just for purposes of painting a picture of the black and white picture. So a extremely strong lucid dream would be a dream where, I'll give an example. Advanced lucid dreamers like to give themselves homework. So before you go to bed, you say, okay, tonight I'm going to dream, and I have a task that I want to do in the dream. And when I wake up in the dream or realize that I'm dreaming, I remember that task and I take action on that task. So I once had a lucid dream, I once had the intention, as I'd read about different lucid dreamers who would meditate in the dream state. I said, well, that'd be pretty cool. And so I've heard it's like a really, exciting meditation. And so I set the intention before going to sleep. Tonight in my dream, I'm gonna realize that I'm dreaming, and I visualized myself realizing that I was dreaming. And then when I went to bed, sure enough, I had a dream. And in this case, I was in a house I lived in previously, and a cat that was at that point deceased in physical reality terms, his name was Tigger. Tigger scampers across the floor, and I realized, oh, it's Tigger. Wait, Tigger's passed. He's transitioned. Wait, I'm dreaming. This is a dream. It was amazing because the house just looked just like my house in waking life. And the bedroom the floor plan was configured very similar to the waking life floor plan. And so I hop in the bed because I thought, let me go in the bedroom and I'll meditate in the bedroom. And the cats hop up the other cat hopped up in the bed with me too. And it's really so realistic, and I started to meditate. So I was able to recall the intention that I had back in physical reality, and then act it out. So it's a very deliberate, conscious thing that happens in sort of a stronger lucid dream like that.
Wow.
And another interesting aspect of that particular dream is that it was sort of a mind-blowing experience, because when I closed my eyes to meditate, I actually didn't make any progress meditating. I closed my eyes to meditate, and then I just couldn't resist the question, well, what happens if I open my eyes? And so I opened my eyes, and there was the room again, but I had actually woken back up into physical reality. And it was sort of like a little bit of like, this is an aspect of lucid dreaming that is very transformational, is you start to question the nature of waking life, because you see just how vivid the lucid dream state is, and you think you're in waking life when you're in the lucid dream or in the dream state. So anyway, okay, so that's one example of sort of like clearly a lucid dream. It's you take volitional action, you use your intention after you have a full realization that you are dreaming, and you take volitional action. Some people prove it to themselves by once I think I'm dreaming, and then they float off the ground. That's a volitional act that shows, no doubt about it, I'm proving to myself that I'm lucid. So normally if you consciously fly in a dream, you're definitely in a strong lucid dream. So then on the other end of the scale, sort of a softer beginning on the shade of gray type dream would be anytime you have a nightmare, and then at the end of the nightmare you realize you're dreaming and you decide to wake yourself up from the dream.
Okay.
Yes.
People commonly do that. And that is, on one level, that is a lucid dream.
Because you're aware.
It's a realization that you're dreaming. Now, what have you done with your power? I know you had an opportunity there potentially to transform the dreamscape. And this is another element of, lucid dreaming that's very interesting, is you can sort of sort out and work out a lot of your waking reality issues by playing around in the dreamscape. So there's that opportunity, especially with nightmares, to do that. But very often we just wake ourselves up. But I would say if you ever wake yourself up from a nightmare, give yourself a pat on the back, and say, hey,
First start.
I'm just getting going with my lucid dreaming and my dream work. A lot of people don't remember anything about their dreams. Here I have, I'm going to put this in my journal. I remembered a dream. That's great. That's step one. And then two, I actually had a little bit of lucidity there because I realized I was dreaming. And then there are, of course, many, halfway steps. In a lot of dreams, sometimes you'll get a little bit of lucidity. You'll realize you're dreaming, but then you sort of wander in the dream and you lose lucidity. Then sometimes you might regain it, So it's something that just takes some practice. And I'll be the first to say, I go through periods of my life where I have very few lucid dreams. In other words, it takes some focus and intention to generate the lucid dreams. I usually have to be doing some meditating. I have to be doing some pre-sleep visualization work before I go to bed. I have to take that 5 or 10 minutes. During the day, there are various daytime practices that you can do that help, plant the seeds for the next coming night. So during the day, one of the things you can do is question your state of consciousness during the day. So I should do that right now. Why not? Right? This is a perfect
Okay.
opportunity.
What are we doing?
Am I dreaming right now?
Are we dreaming?
All right. So let me see if I can float off this chair.
Not happening.
Not happening.
Right.
Not happening. So probably not dreaming. Another thing you might do is you might look at a sign on the wall, and you might say, okay, let's say there was a sign that had like an exit sign above the door. You might look at that and then look away from it, and look at it again and look away from it. If 3 times in a row it still says exit over the door, it's a pretty good chance you're in waking life.
Waking life. Okay.
Because in dreamscape reality, it's much more fluid and much less stable.
Yeah.
And so it's not a shared consensus reality. It's sort of just your own, can be. I mean, sometimes it's shared with some people, but often it's more your own private environment.
Interesting.
This whole thing makes me think of Inception.
I was just going to go there.
And that movie was so confusing
I was
to
just
me.
going to say, so I'm sure you've seen the movie.
Yeah, of course,
and
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe you've
How
studied
realistic
it,
do you
It's
think?
it's very unrealistic and exaggerated. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Bummer.
Yeah, I was like,
Well, stabilizing lucid dream is one of the challenges. Getting lucid is great, and it takes a lot of work to get lucid. But to stay lucid for extended periods of time, like they do in the movie, is,
Plus with
yeah.
other people.
Plus
with other characters,
yeah,
right?
that's
but is that a possibility? I mean,
it's a possibility.
to,
Yes.
to incorporate multiple. I mean, say if you had 2 people in a room and your intention was, we're going to meet up at this tree, and in the dream, once you get into that state, is there that possibility you can meet up at that tree with that
Yeah, and
individual?
there are some advanced practitioners, I'd say, books I've read. Robert Wagner, Charlie Morley, they both in interviews and in books have told stories of how they did experiments with other lucid dreamers, and they were able to have some experience that was suggestive that they had seen each other in the dream. So, but I'd say that's probably something I've not personally experienced, and it's something I would leave. It's going to be pretty far along your path.
Yeah, you have to really be dedicated to the craft to get to that point.
And have, I'd say, a lot of intention.
Yeah.
How different would that be than meeting up with others during a meditative experience? Is that similar?
When you say meeting up with others in a meditative
Well, if you meditate together,
yeah.
or if I do a group regression experience.
You're saying with people meditating in different places?
Either that or together,
Okay,
really. But a lot of times when we do group regression work, they go to the same place.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And it's fairly common.
I think there's
so-
some similarity to that. Yeah, I think hypnosis work and dream work have a a lot of overlap. You're basically diving into a layer,
Another reality.
A state of consciousness.
another state of consciousness that's you're shifting your focus away from. I'd say interesting too with some of my dream experiences is, and you'll see lucid dreamers report this quite a bit. You can often have these experiences where you have multiple dreams that you're conscious of at one time.
Yikes.
And you can basically focus and defocus a little bit from them.
Wow.
Again, that's a little bit more advanced. I don't have that commonly, but I've had some experiences with that. And again, this is another way that lucid dreaming for me helps wake me up to the true nature of life. In other words, again, looking at a Seth model of reality, Seth would be a proponent of like we're living in a multiverse. In other words,
Right.
the metaphor that Jane Roberts, who channeled the material, gave is a Ferris wheel. And so think of the soul as being at the center of the Ferris wheel, and each of the buckets of the Ferris wheel representing potentially a past life or a probable self in another in this life, a parallel life, and this maybe another Chris Cunniffe version of me.
Right.
And each of those buckets exists simultaneously, and the soul at the center, the hub of the Ferris wheel, can focus its energy, defocus its energy on. So and this ties in with hypnosis work, because that's basically what you're doing as a guide, is you're helping someone. Not necessarily. I don't think of it as a past life. I mean, I know we could call it that.
They're all concurrent.
Yeah. I know. You're helping them focus on a concurrent life, and it's not say that's simple, but it's a very strong gift you have for doing that, where you can get people to focus on that time and that place and be embodied in that.
Yes.
I know I'm sure you probably read some of the Dolores Cannon books, which are amazing and really opened my eyes up to how a talented hypnotherapist can really take people places.
Right, and that's what it is. It's a defocusing.
Yeah.
Because when we leave this body, this is going to seem like a dream, and that is reality, right?
Yeah.
So it's a matter of where our focus is. At this point, our focus is primarily through this human body purposefully,
Yeah, right.
but in meditation or hypnosis or whatever, we can focus on those past lives, future lives, metaphysical lives,
So, you know,
multidimensional rather.
I'm going to go back to that intention setting before the dream state. So, and I guess where my mind goes with this is, if you're setting intention, and if it's nothing more than just to, I'll say, go into the sandbox and play, have you use those intentions to what's coming up in the next day? Say you have a business meeting, or you have some sort of interaction you've got to do, or something that's going to be taking place. Can you play that script out through the dream state to get more clarity on what's going to take place, or not clarity, but just
Or influence it.
influence or something? You know, does that parlay
Yes,
at all?
and I think this is true both of lucid dreaming, but also of just regular dream work.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example that's a pretty famous dream. Jack Nicklaus had a famous dream. He told a reporter, and he was in a golfing slump, and he had a dream, and he collapsed his elbow a different way on his backswing or something like that. And he woke up from the dream. He said, "Oh, okay." And so he went to the practice range and started making that adjustment. And he said suddenly he was shooting back in the 60s again and doing well in tournaments. And he actually told that whole story to a reporter. And he says, "Yeah, it was sort of crazy that it happened in a dream." You know,
Right.
So dreams can be a place where you can rehearse. I've heard. I remember a story from a field goal kicker that he ended up kicking a game-winning kick, and the night before he had dreamed of being in that environment and kicking it from a similar distance and so forth. And so, yes, certainly it's a place where you can rehearse your talents and your gifts. I also think that the pre-sleep intention is useful for if you have a challenge in your life, to ask for a dream, to ask for guidance from your inner self and have it come to you in the form of a dream. And that's just to then pay attention and see what you get. And you'll be surprised that you often will get a dream that is responsive to that.
Yeah, you're bringing that up as you're bringing that up. I'm thinking about situations in my life. As I was transitioning from military into civilian world, there were several different jobs I was, applying for and whatnot. And I remember having a specific night of dreams where I was in the job, and I knew exactly which job it was, and but I just at that moment just thought of it as a dream, but then coming out of it the next day or several days later, having this recall of this dream of saying, okay, wait a minute, that's one of the jobs I applied for, and within a week after that, I'm actually called in for an interview and subsequently get the job. Right. So, and I didn't send an intention, but those focal points were there because of knowing what I was trying to achieve.
Well, another thing that you may be getting to here is, and this is something that Abraham talks a little bit about, is the dream state is very, very thought responsive environment. So let's say you're looking to make a change in your life, right? When they talk about inner guidance, they point to a few different things. One is in the immediate moment, pay attention to how you feel. Now, they say nothing is more important than how you feel. How you feel is your indicator of your point of attraction. So feel, and you can change how you feel by changing your thoughts. So if you shift your thoughts to more pleasant things that please you, you start to feel better, you're raising your vibration. So that's one way that you get guidance from your inner self in the moment. The second, probably fastest way to get feedback from yourself is dream state, because if you start to change your vibration in wake state, if you start to feel better, you move your energy towards something with intention, you will often have a dream where you manifest that in the dream state. So in my own life, we were involved with a development project a few years ago where we built an office building and 4 townhouses and with some partners. And there was a lot of work with that and a lot of uncertainty with that. We're in the town of Mount Pleasant where there's a lot of uncertainty over which can be approved and the timelines and the contractor and all these things. But I was pretty focused on it and making it move forward. And I remember having a dream where I actually flew over the site. and I saw the buildings in their completed form.
Nice.
And so it manifested first in the dream state before it manifested in the wake state. So the wake state is also a form of guidance because we're constantly getting reflections. In other words, you two are reflections of my energy. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be invited here. I take that as a very positive sign that I was invited to be here. So you're constantly getting feedback from your waking environment because you're seeing what you're attracting. So that's also really a form of inner guidance, just paying attention to what you're attracting into your life. So the dream state is that intermediary state where you can really see what you are in the process. And if you have a negative dream, that's okay. In other words, be thankful for the negative dream because you created it in the dream state and you noticed it in the dream state. You can say, aha, I'm on the way to creating that. I don't want to create that.
Right.
And now you have a chance to reverse course and shift your energy because it's a dream. It's not a permanent form. And frankly, of course, neither is waking life a permanent form. You can always transform it in waking life also. But it has a feeling of permanence, in waking life. So be thankful for that opportunity to sculpt. If you pay attention to your dreams, you can be paying attention to what you're in the process of creating. And then make adjustments to say, okay, you know what? I have to acknowledge the way I've been thinking. I can see how I was creating that, how I created that dream. That dream is a mirror. Right. It's always a mirror. It's always reflecting back to us. Sometimes it's a funhouse mirror. It's an exaggerate. I mean, this is what dreams do. Dreams exaggerate things. Yeah. So that we can, but it's for our benefit. Some dream teachers really focus on the idea that dreams always come to us in service of health and wholeness. That's something that's, Jeremy Taylor was who that comes from. Jeremy Taylor, who's sort of a Jungian bent, but a teacher of dreams. Dreams always come to you in service of health and wholeness. So even if it's a nightmare, be thankful for the nightmare because it serves you in some way. It brings something into your attention that you were either ignoring or not aware of. And now you can see it more clearly because it was exaggerated for you to see. Right. And by the way, this happens in waking life as well. In waking life, I call them cartoon characters. So if there's someone in your waking life who pushes your buttons,
there will be. If not, there's something wrong.
Right.
Pay attention to those people. They are there as exaggerated dreamlike figures to show you in exaggerated form what you have going on internally.
Beautiful.
And I'll tell just a quick story I like to tell along these lines. So I got a parking ticket a few years ago, and I was on Sullivan's Island, and I was going for a beach walk, and I got back to my car, and there was like this bright orange parking ticket. And the initial thing, if you feel it rise up within you, frustration, right? The anger, the nickel and diming me. And the ticket was because my tire was
on that street.
You're not allowed to touch the pavement.
Right.
You have to park off the pavement.
Right.
And I just had a sliver of my tire that was touching the pavement.
Yeah.
And then but this point in my life, I was pretty well attuned with Abraham work and Seth work. And okay, wait, no one else created this. I clearly,
no one else put their tire.
I created this, and I thought more carefully about my thought process with Sullivan's Island. And I realized that very recently we had a real estate listing on Sullivan's Island. One of my team members had a listing, and we didn't have a business license on Sullivan's Island. And some of the local municipalities they don't care. They let you put up signs and they don't really have, but occasionally you find a town that's like, oh, do you have a business license? You put a sign in the yard. And so we had to pay, $400 and get a business license. And I had been carrying that with me because on the way to that beach walk, I remember seeing a real estate sign and I had the thought in my head, I hope you got your business license because you're going to get nickeled and dimed if you don't, So the parking ticket, now I look at it, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful parking ticket. It's a perfect reflection of my energy, my own thought process. And now I'm able to transform the energy. I'm able to remember, I proposed to my wife on Sullivan's Island.
Oh,
yeah.
Shouldn't that be what I focus upon when I go to Sullivan's Island? When my first 3 years in Charleston, I rented an apartment lived out there on Sullivan's Island. I had bonfires with friends on Sullivan's Island.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be where I put all my energy and my thoughts instead of when I'm driving around the island? I hope you got your business license. You're going to get nickeled and dimed by the town. You know. So when you get these cartoon, now that's a cartoon reflection in the form of a piece of paper.
Sure.
But it was bright orange.
Yeah.
But you'll also get them in the form of personalities that come to you and exaggerate things for you, and that helps you notice what you have going on within you.
That's hilarious. I was just on Sullivan's Island this weekend.
Yeah, you were.
With my friend Judy, and as I parked off the street, it occurred to me, I mean, they have us trained. Keep those tires off of, completely off.
Right.
Matter of fact, there was a beautiful big white house next to where we park, and there was a guy cutting his grass, and he had a hat with a big old Zeta alien on it.
Oh, wow.
I was like, ooh, I'm in the right place. It was awesome. So what about the lucid dream? Most people have a lucid dream where it wasn't like they intended to have one, but a deceased loved one, particularly a spouse, comes and it was so real. Maybe they embraced or kissed or whatever, and they wake up just knowing that it was real.
Yes.
So what about these types of lucid occurrences that really aren't orchestrated by you, but by the other side? Is there anything different or notable about that?
I definitely feel it's a form of spirit communication that's open to it. I think the more open you are to dream work, it's funny you mentioned that, because I mentioned, we had a meeting of the Jung Society. Before we went on, started the podcast, we were talking about the Jung Society. We had a sort of a relaunch meeting last night. And one of our board members, who we dedicated the meeting to, Linda, she had passed away recently. And so when the meeting was open, the meeting was dedicated to her. And she was a former board member and someone who was deeply involved in the organization. And I dreamed about her last night.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm getting emotional. So it is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was not for me. That was not a lucid dream,
Yeah.
but unmistakably, a visitation.
Yeah. Visitation.
And the setting of the dream was a meeting of the Jung Society. And it was her way of saying that she was there.
Yeah.
Yes, and almost like a thank you too.
Yeah.
Thank you for honoring me in that way.
Yep.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned this kind of briefly early
Yeah.
on, but if you not just wake up and take notes of your
Yeah.
dreams, but if you're lucid dreaming frequently, is that affecting your waking in terms of being tired and whatnot? Is it keeping you from getting the rest that you need?
I don't think so, other than if you do a lot of it and you're recording, if you're waking up every 3 hours in the night to record dreams and take a lot of notes. I mean, sometimes a really long dream, it could take you a half hour, 45 minutes to record all your notes.
Sure, right.
That could, if you're literally not getting as much sleep. But I think if you're, while you're dreaming, I think your body is still recuperating. And I think some sleep scientists would say, and I'm not here to be a sleep expert, but some sleep scientists would say that in the early morning hours, that deeper restorative sleep where the brainwave activity really slows down into the delta state, that is where you get that in the first 2 to 3 hours of the night, you get that deep restorative sleep. And it appears that we don't dream as much in that state. Then in the early morning hours, REM sleep, and some people don't understand, but REM sleep is actually very close to waking consciousness. REM sleep is just dipping in, and when that wave peaks, you're almost awake. And it, so that's why you often wake up after a dream, is because that REM sleep is very, very close. So hopefully you got your deep restorative sleep in the early hours.
Okay.
And now in the early morning hours, you're resting, your body is resting. I don't think that whether you're dreaming non-lucidly, which everybody dreams, whether you're dreaming non-lucidly or lucidly, I think you're still getting rest.
Well, that's interesting in light of Seth's 4-hour sleep schedule type of thing, because if you sleep for only 4 hours, then those first, I guess, a couple of hours would be the
deep restorative
deeper
sleep.
and less dreaming. So I wonder, on that sleep schedule, would you dream less frequently?
Yeah, he seems to think you would recall more dreams because you would just be dipping out of consciousness a little bit more. I also feel like he feels like the fact that we sleep the solid 8 hours, it tends to reify. Or, reify is a fancy word. We tend to make waking reality seem extremely solid. Whereas if we were drifting more in and out, we would sort of appreciate dream, and we would maybe just see it as a continuum. Whereas now we don't tend to see it as a continuum. And that's another thing. It's like our culture generally speaking, does not appreciate dreams. And our culture often takes the attitude, oh, sleep, that's when you shut down your body. That's when you go unconscious. And so the lucid dreaming work, or the interest in lucid dreaming, is about saying, no, it's not about going completely unconscious. It's actually an opportunity to explore consciousness.
Yes. And it's so interesting how all of these segments overlap, really.
Yes.
All of these different types of reality and consciousness overlap, because you talked about Jack Nicklaus, you know, training himself on a new golf swing while he was sleeping, but you can do the same thing with just visualization. Like a lot of pro athletes will simply visualize, and Joe Dispenza talks about this, and about imagining. So nothing has happened without you imagining it first.
Right.
So anything that's invented, for example, you have to physically kind of see it in your mind's eye. And so just visualization is
like,
sort of accomplishing that.
Like, and the way I would, in my head, I look at that as being a visual intention setting. You're actually, it's the physicality of the intention that you're putting forward. So if it's an athlete that's trying to change up a swing or shooting a basketball or something, it's your intention is to become better, or your intention is to change it up just a bit. Well, now you're visualizing that intention, and from the law enforcement side of myself, my past career, that's what you repetitively do, those visualization maneuvers without even holding a weapon. You're going through all of the orchestrations of that, but your intention is to get more proficient. Your intention is to get better at what you're doing. And so it's just,
you start attracting the resources.
Exactly.
For that.
So as you do that, then as you refine the skill, that's now back into this realm. As you refine those skills of your gifts, universal actions begin to fill in the voids and begin to bring more into your alignment, bring more into that flow, and open more opportunities. So,
So you've also kind of alluded to this too, but give us like a rundown then of all of suppose our audience members want to try to lucid dream tonight, or this week, or this month. What are some of the strategies that they should start using right now?
Great, happy to do that. So strategy number one is start keeping a dream journal. So if you're not journaling your dreams, you very well could go lucid in your dream. And then have it transition to non-lucidity, and then wake up and not record anything. And you had a lucid dream and you didn't write down. So dream recall is a very important muscle. I didn't start to have any lucid dreamings until I started keeping a dream journal. Dream recall is a muscle that you exercise. It's like going to the gym. And so people sometimes say, well, all I remember is I was in a room and there was a clock and there was a chair. Well, I would say, did you write down clock and chair in your dream journal? No, I didn't bother to write that down. Right. Well, start writing that down. In other words, you got to start somewhere. If you don't start exercising that muscle on the small things, you're not going to be able to build it up.
And don't you notice when you write it or tell somebody about it, it becomes more vivid. You remember more.
You start, and exactly.
And even the meanings start to come in, I think.
So you'll start out maybe just writing down a couple of things. Then you'll find over time that as you're writing those few things, it's important in the morning when you wake up, please, don't check your email immediately.
Right.
Don't check your social media account immediately. Don't start thinking about all the things your to-do list for the day that's ahead of you. You've got to set aside at least, a 5 to 10 minute period when you wake up in the bed. Just enjoy that. Usually when you wake up, Abraham talks about hitting the reset button every night. Your body does a natural reset. When you wake up, if you don't start thinking about negative things, you will, if you don't check your email and if you don't check your social media and you don't start getting negative, you will feel very refreshed in your body. So just sort of marinate in that state, just relax in that state, and then use that 5-10 minutes just to see, okay, did I have any dreams last night? You'll find that even if you start writing down a couple of ideas, now I type mine into my phone, but other people,
or you can talk them in your phone.
You can talk them in your phone. You can have a pad and paper, whatever you choose. So that's important. Do something. Set the intention to have that journal. Put that piece of paper beside the pad beside your bed, or if you're using your phone. For me, I have to change all the settings in my phone before I go to sleep. I reverse all the settings, so I make everything dim. It's like a black and white screen, so it doesn't shock my eyes. So I have it set so that when I wake up, I'm going to be able to pick it up. I'm going to be able to type notes and not
That's a good point.
Crazy.
Good point. Yeah.
So whether you're doing that or you have a little lamp on your notepad, go to Barnes & Noble, buy that little lamp for your notepad. Whatever you're going to do that. So that's step one, certainly get in the habit of recording the dreams. Two would be, before you go to sleep, do that visualization work. So visualize the color of the ink you're going to, before you go to sleep. Okay, I'm going to be excited about waking up, remembering a dream. I see myself writing it down. I see myself maybe writing down the time. I see the color of the ink that I'm writing with, or whatever it is, Then probably the most power, there are so many lucid dream techniques. We don't have time here to really, we could spend a couple hours talking about them. I'll just go into the one I think is the most powerful, especially, and it piggybacks on what we've been talking about with intention and visualization. Stephen LaBerge, who is sort of an important figure in lucid dreaming, he was one of the first scientists to scientifically demonstrate the validity of lucid dreaming. He was also a prolific lucid dreamer himself. His methodology is basically a visualization technique where when you wake up in the morning from a dream, or wake up in the middle of the night from a dream, it's typically going to be a non-lucid dream. Before you go back to sleep, visualize that same exact dream in your head, but this time, visualize yourself noticing something that was out of place. Like the example I gave earlier, Tigger, the cat. Wait, he's deceased. So if you had the dream with Tigger and you didn't realize it and you were non-lucid, now, before you go back to sleep again, visualize yourself realizing, oh, that was a dream. And you're basically priming the pump for your consciousness to be recognizing, we call them dream signs, things you should have noticed in the environment that would have tipped you off that you were dreaming. Because dream signs are a very powerful tool that helps you latch onto something to realize, wait a minute, I might be dreaming. So that would be probably the most powerful tool. The other tool that I would recommend is, it'd be more of a daytime practice.
Okay.
And during the day, like I did earlier where I pretended to float out of the chair, just a few times a day. Sometimes I recommend having something to trigger you to check your reality. So one thing I do, for instance, police sirens. I'm not going to hear a police siren every minute, but I might hear over the course of a day, 3 or 4 times, I might hear a police siren. That's my little trigger. I say, oh, it's a police siren. I got to do my little reality check. I have to, because if you get in the habit of checking your reality during the daytime, that habit's going to carry
That's
forward
a really good point.
into the dream state.
I see now.
And your inner self will help you.
Yeah.
Your inner self will then provide sirens in the dream to help you say, wait a minute, that's one of my dream signs. I better do a reality check. And lo and behold, I'm able to float off the ground.
Neat.
Yeah.
I love it.
So those are a couple ideas. Like Stephen LaBerge's books are fantastic he goes through all the different techniques.
Is that somebody you would recommend for a beginner lucid
For
dreamer?
someone interested in lucid dreaming, must reading would be Stephen LaBerge and then Robert Wagner.
Okay.
And Robert Wagner would be more for the spiritual angle.
Okay.
He's a Seth guy and believes in, all the stuff that we talked about with the Seth teachings. And he goes through his exploration with Seth and other teachers. So he sort of gives you the spiritual path of lucid dreaming. Stephen would be giving, for people that are left brain, he was the scientist
More just nuts and bolts stuff.
He was the scientist in the sleep lab that proved that lucid dreaming is real. And they did that by they call them the eye experiments, where the dreamer, while all the measurements in the sleep lab showed that they were asleep, but they were able to intentionally move their eyes. When they intentionally moved their eyes in the dream, they also recorded on the EEG machine in the sleep lab. And so those experiments were important for sort of giving scientific validity to the idea of lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Wow, that was fantastic. This has been such a fun discussion. Oh my gosh, I learned so much and it was so much fun. Is there anything that we haven't thought to ask you that you think it's important for our viewers to know about this topic or anything else that's on your mind?
I'll just put the cherry on top with saying that, all this lucid dream work, it's really ultimately about also learning about this waking life, and that, I know there are different definitions of what awakening is, but for me, awakening is coming to realize that this is also basically a dream state, that this is also more of a psychological environment or a psycho-spiritual environment than it is purely a physical environment. And that one of the great benefits of lucid dreaming is to experiment with that in the dream state and then carry it over into this state,
the physical state,
and realize, oh wait, I'm also in a psycho-spiritual environment now. And how do I manipulate in a psycho-spiritual environment? Is it through banging my head in the grind, or do I try to generate synchronicity? Do I use the power of my thoughts, the power of my emotional states, and learn to manipulate like you might manipulate in the dream state, but do it in waking life?
That's
Famous
amazing.
last words. Awakening is realizing that this is actually a sleep state.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
This has been so much fun, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you for having me.
coming.
Yeah.
We love that. And to all of our viewers, thank you for spending your time with Out on a Limb podcast. Please give that thumbs up.
Wait, you got to go to 11111 now.
There we go.
Okay, good.
Oh,
All
we're
right,
stopping
yes,
at
good.
111.11.
That's it.
Until next time,
See you guys.
see you later.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.